Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're looking at Apple and Rivian. Should Apple buy Rivian? With Rivian announcing three new vehicles, not one, not two, three new vehicles, it's been quite a surprise to the public, to the EV world, to the Apple fans, to the Rivian fans as well, because the conversation is backed. Not just the fact that Rivian has surprised the world, but also because Apple has recently had their own surprise, canceling their EV car project. And this was quite a shock if there ever were one. So during the introduction of the company's latest creation, the R2 SUV, a lower cost, slightly smaller SUV, this undercuts the price of the Rivian's current R1T and R1S model by tens of thousands of dollars. Rivian CEO RJ Scaringe skillfully one-upped a famous representation highlight from late Apple CEO and co-founder Steve Jobs. As the R2 was revealed, wrapping up, Argus quickly added that there was one more thing to show, borrowing Jobs' famous line that current CEO Tim Cook has also utilized that would send Apple loyalists into a frenzy as he would unveil an unexpected tech threat. Last Thursday, RJ Scaringe revealed not only one thing but two, the smaller hatchback style R3, not to mention technically three, the more off-road capable R3X, a variant of the R3. The R3X is supposed to be a more compact performance vehicle, while the R3 is supposed to be more straightforward, more simplistic. I certainly think R3 is more geared towards everyday use, while the R3X is more geared for an adventurous perspective. So the R3X is definitely my type of car. Now, the fact that it seemed absolutely no one in the automotive press had caught wind of the R3 ahead of the event, the R2 has seen few last-minute leaks, demonstrated a certain high-tight security around model development at Rivian, something Mr. Jobs would impress with. So is Rivian making the vehicle that Apple just abandoned after more than a decade of effort and untold billions into R&D? And if so, is this company, Rivian by RJ Scaringe, a good fit for Cook's Apple project? Now, on many grounds, this makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of prospects out there that Apple could acquire that are EV companies. For one, Rivian. It's an American company, just like Apple. Being based not just on the same continent but in the same country is a huge benefit. Rivian already has many of its infrastructure laid out. In many ways, the companies are run somewhat similar. They have a very clean portfolio. They're not as chaotic as Tesla. They're a bit more straightforward and pleasant, and they just keep it safe. They stick to the books, similar to Apple in many ways. And not to mention, the CEO is not as chaotic as Elon Musk. So this works for the Apple portfolio because that's what Apple likes. They like company that it's enough to get your attention to buy, but it's not enough to get your attention to hate. I believe Rivian fits this quite perfectly. But yeah, Rivian already has quite a lot of infrastructure. They've got one factory in Illinois. They're working on another one in Georgia. They've got two vehicles already that the American market seems to love, and these are the most expensive vehicles that they can offer. They're coming out with three new vehicles in the next 3 years, I believe, and these will be much cheaper. R2 starting from 45 grand. The R3, we're looking at under $48,000. That would be absolutely incredible. What if it starts at $35,000 and the tax credit is also included in the US? That's meaning that it could cost less than 30 grand for this vehicle. Wouldn't that be incredible? Now, to be honest, I think Apple would be the perfect partner, but there's one thing that does concern me. If Apple bought Rivian, I'm quite certain that Rivian will become a private company overnight. I don't think Rivian will be allowed to remain a public company. I think Apple would want it under its wings full time. Especially if Apple has this company, Rivian doesn't really need funding anymore. They'll have all the funding they want from Apple. With that being said, just imagine that reality. I think they'd be greatly successful together, but there's other prospects out there that are cheaper. There's Polestar, but they've got great connections with Geely in China and Volvo in Sweden, so perhaps they don't want to go that far out. What about Lucid? It's a US company. They build vehicles in the US, but again, it's owned by Saudi Arabian government fund. And perhaps Apple, again, don't want to go that far out. Honestly, Lucid is almost the perfect candidate. Almost. But I think because they already have an owner, a major investor in the Saudi Arabian government, I don't think Apple wants to touch it. But they would be perfect apart from that. Now, if it's not Lucid, then it's Rivian, right? But what about Canoe? Could they just buy the Canoe company? I've heard rumors that the vehicle that Apple was working on supposedly looked very similar to the Canoe vehicle. The Canoe vehicles, of course, look like somewhat minibus kind of vibe. So those are a few candidates. I don't think Arrival is in this option because Arrival makes vehicles for, delivery vans and buses. They want to make those kind of vehicles. I think a company that should buy Arrival is like Mercedes because Mercedes already makes delivery vans. They already make, trucks and these things. Arrival is super cheap at the moment. But perhaps Mercedes is thinking, yeah, but what asset do they add to the Mercedes portfolio? Except for the idea of microfactories. But not even that Arrival has been able to do correctly. They've been struggling because of a lack of fund. And it makes a lot of sense. But there's a heavy emphasis on making EV vehicles, like EV cars. But is there enough influence in making EV trucks? Because trucks and delivery vehicles, they create a huge amount of emissions. I think it's like 10 to 15%, if not more. You got to remember, because of all of that driving that they do, it is the one thing that they do. They're constantly on the move. So they create a lot of emissions. While the car that we use as daily people, we probably end up driving our car 1-2 hours a day, maybe 3. But unless your job is driving in your own car every day, then you probably don't drive it that much. Rivian has huge investments from Amazon. Amazon owns a good portion of Rivian. I'm not entirely sure if Apple wants to get involved in that. But I think Rivian is the perfect candidate. They can certainly buy out Amazon. In fact, it's incredible. It amazes me that Amazon hasn't already bought Rivian. But here's the thing, Rivian is completely cheap right now for Apple and Amazon. Rivian is incredibly cheap. So a hostile takeover could be easily done like that. I don't understand why Apple doesn't want to do a hostile takeover. I would not understand why Amazon wouldn't do a hostile takeover. They can risk it. They don't need the good reputation. Amazon is Amazon. While Apple likes to protect its reputation in almost every way. Everything that it does is in secrecy. Especially the deals that they make, especially whenever they buy companies, we rarely hear about when Apple bought a new company. But guess what? Apple buys new companies all the time, but you never hear about it. And that's the way how they do business, really. The most famous purchase was perhaps the Siri, when they bought that from someone else and turned it into Siri. When they bought a weather app and turned it into their own. When they bought Beats by Dre. Those are some of their biggest purchases, well known, but they've bought a lot of other companies. You don't hear anything about them. So the huge effort to create the Apple car is clearly demonstrated that Cook and his nearly $3 trillion company wants entry into the automotive sector to create new high-margin products outside of iPhone, iMacs, and the Apple Vision Pro VR and AI headset displays, despite the lofty price tags for the initial incarnation, is a clear indication that Apple wants to diversify its portfolio in terms of making money. If the high-tech headset is pretty much its wheelhouse already, but cars, of course, it's extremely difficult to successfully launch a new car, just as Elon and Mr. Scaringe as previously stated. However, if you can pull it off, almost boundless riches can be had, just as Elon. But don't ask RJ. Now, I know why the article don't ask RJ, because the Rivian stock hasn't been performing very good. Not for investors who invested when the company was IPO'd. If you invested then you're probably not in the best position right now. But I'm happy to say I waited a long time. I waited almost 2 years to invest in Rivian when the price was at its cheapest I could get. And I'm happy to see that it's crashed recently. Before the announcement of the new cars, it crashed, and that was a great time for me to buy. Really great opportunity. Now, since the new cars have announced, the stock has been trickling back up, over 17% in the last 5 days of trading, in fact. So that's good. But that's from Thursday to Friday. Rivian went up like 17%. And keep in mind that the IPO that saw Rivian stock price at a peak of $130 per share in 2021, The big news day after the R2 and R3 reveal was that the Rivian stock spiked 20% to almost $13 per share, but then it bottled down back a little bit to around 17%. But I believe Rivian will probably go back down a little bit, and here's my reason why. Because they're not gonna make it. They're not gonna make a lot of deliveries this year, not compared to the amount they made last year. It's not like they're trying to do 75,000 deliveries this year. No, it's a lot lower. It's like in the 55,000 or 56,000, maybe even less, which is quite disappointed for everyone who watched the company for the last couple of years. We were expecting bigger numbers this year. But also the new vehicles, they're not coming on the market anytime soon. The R2 is coming on the market in 2026. As for the R3 and R3X, they're probably later that year or probably 2027. So we're still a long way from these vehicles being on the road. Cheaper vehicles, that is. So you can imagine the Rivian stock probably won't perform so well. Now, this is a great opportunity for novice such as myself, of course. I can't give financial advice, so this is not financial advice. It's just my opinion. And my opinion is that for me, this is a great opportunity to buy because it's still an extremely valuable company. And to be this cheap is just remarkable. And if someone does try to buy this company, I can guarantee you the price will be a lot higher than it is right now. The shares will spike. Imagine if Apple announced, if there's so much as just a hint or an announcement that Apple is buying this company, the stock price will absolutely explode. If it's an agreed price, then the stock price will remain at that price. We've seen stranger things happen, haven't we? There's a ton of value these companies could bring with each other. But if I'm being completely honest, if I really had to think hard about this decision, I don't want Apple to buy Rivian. I really don't. I like Rivian being its own thing. I wish they could have the support of Apple, but still be independent. I wish they could have the resources that Apple has, but Rivian could still be independent. But that's not going to happen, isn't it? Rivian has its own software in the vehicle. They have their own software, their own operating system. Apple wants their own operating system in the Apple car. So I'd like Rivian to remain its own thing. Also, I love investing in a company. If Apple buys it, you can forget about that. But if Apple did buy this company, I would still be happy for Rivian because I really like the cars. But that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.